significance of these victims, they have ensured the second goal of the march. Men and women that gathered 50 years ago were not there in search of some abstract idea. For they're seeking jobs as well as justice. Not just the absence of oppression, but the presence of economic opportunity. What does it profit a man, Dr. King would ask, to sit at an integrated lunch counter if he can't afford the meal? This idea that one's liberty is linked to one's livelihood, that the pursuit of happiness requires the dignity of work, the skills to find work, decent paying, some measure of material security. This idea was not new. Lincoln himself understood the Declaration of Independence in such terms, as a promise that in due time the weight should be lifted from the shoulders of all men, and that all should have an equal chance. Dr. King explained that the goals of African Americans were identical to working people of all races. Decent wages, fair working conditions, livable housing, old age security, health and welfare measures, conditions in which families can grow, have education for their children, and respect in the community. King was described for every American. What's more for centuries that will rise to our shores. And it's along the second dimension of economic opportunity, the chance through honest toil to advance one station in life. The goals of 50 years ago have fallen falls short. Yes, there have been examples of success within Black America that would have been unimaginable a half century ago. As has already been noted, Black unemployment has remained almost twice as high as white. Continual unemployment comes behind. The gap in wealth between races is not lessened, it's growing. As President Clinton indicated, the position of all working Americans, regardless of color, is eroded, making the dream Dr. King described even more elusive. For over a decade, working Americans of all races have seen their wages and income stagnate, even as corporate profits soar, even as the pay of a portion of few explodes. Inequality is steadily risen in these decades. Upward mobility has become hard. Too many communities across this country, in cities and suburbs and rural hamlets, shadow poverty casts a pall over our youth, their lives a fortress of substandard schools and diminished prospects, inadequate health care, perennial violence. So, as we mark this anniversary, we must remind ourselves that the measure of progress for those who marched 50 years ago was not merely how many blacks could join the ranks of millionaires. It was whether this country would admit all people who were willing to work hard, regardless of race, into the ranks of a middle-class life. The test was not and never has been whether the doors of opportunity are cracked a bit wider for a few. It's whether our economic system provides a fair shot for the many, for the black custodian and the white steelworker, the immigrant dishwasher, and the Native American veteran. To win that battle, to answer that call, this remains our great unfinished business. shouldn't fool ourselves. The task will not be easy. Since 1963, the economy's changed. The twin forces of technology and global competition have subtracted those jobs that once provided a foothold into the middle class, reduced the bargaining power of American workers. And our politics has suffered. Entrenched interests, those who benefit from an unjust status quo, resisted any government efforts to give working families a fair deal, marshaling an army of lobbyists and opinion makers to argue that minimum wage increases or stronger labor laws or taxes on the wealthy who could afford it just to fund crumbling schools, that all these things violated sound economic principles. We'd be told that growing inequality was a price for a growing economy. Measure of the free market. The greed was good, compassion ineffective. And those without jobs or health care had only themselves to blame. Then there were those elected officials who found it useful to practice the old politics of division, doing their best to convince middle-class Americans of a great untruth, that government was somehow itself to blame for their growing economic insecurity. The distant bureaucrats were taking their hard-earned dollars to benefit the welfare chief and illegal immigrants. And then, if we're honest with ourselves, we'll admit that during the course of 50 years, there were times when some of us, claiming to push for change, lost our way. The anguish of assassinations set off self-defeating riots. Legitimate grievances against police brutality tipped into excuse-making for criminal behavior. Racial politics could cut both ways, as the transformative message of unity and brotherhood was drowned out by the language of recrimination. And what had once been a call for equality of opportunity, the chance for all Americans to work hard and get ahead, was too often framed as a mere desire for government support, as if we had no agency in our own liberation, as if poverty was an excuse for not raising your child. Bigotry of others was reason to give up on yourself.